Have you ever found yourself reading a visual novel? It's like a solid 8 or 9, and then you reach that one route and think, what the fuck was that? Maybe the writing was bad, maybe you didn't like the direction of the route. Either way, it can sour an otherwise pleasurable experience. Today, we'll be looking at some visual novel routes that I felt really underperformed compared to their visual novel as a whole, and why that is. Of course, these are just my personal choices, and if you can think of your very own disappointing route in a visual novel, I'd love to hear it down below. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Bruce, and let's get right into it. If My Heart Had Wings features protagonist Aoi Minase and his friends as they work together to revive the Soaring Club, a club primarily focused on building and flying gliders. While the tone of the story embraces things like dreams and ambition, the routes each have their own flavor. And the route in question today is Aoi's childhood best friend, Agaha's route. This route was a mess. Agaha's route is one of the most awkwardly written versions of the more than friends but not lovers scenario I have ever seen. Years ago, Aoi had confessed his feelings for Agaha, who at the time rejected him and just wanted to stay friends, even though she totally liked him then and still does. 5 years pass, and despite the pair growing close again, Agaha still can't sort out her feelings, leading her to be wishy-washy with her emotions for the entire route, and in turn, essentially gaslights Aoi, who is understandably confused on how Agaha feels. Even in times when Agaha depends on Aoi and they begin to get intimate, she later regrets it and shuts him out. It's just stiffly forced drama. Put on your seatbelt for this one, or else you'll get emotional whiplash. What's worse, if for some reason you end up reading this game without the patch that fixes the translation and adds back the H content, this route quite literally makes no sense. In an otherwise incredible visual novel, Agaha's route is the sole outlier in being complete and utter dog shit. Whether you are a grown adult or a 12-year-old French girl, this route will be the epitome of disappointment if you were a fan of Agaha's character, and you probably won't be after the route. In Wagamama High Spec, Koki Narumi is your typical high school eroge protagonist who storyboards and writes for his own serialized manga, balancing his work with his day-to-day school life. This includes seeing his childhood friend and kohai Mihiro every morning, a girl that loves to tease Koki and is our featured heroine for a disappointing route. Cause she almost had me. I don't like childhood friend or kohai characters generally, because they very easily fall into their respective tropes, and Mihiro wasn't exactly exempt from that, but at least she had some spunk. Mihiro is a talented but lackadaisical girl who is always an assertive flirt with the protagonist, yet can be passionate when she wants to be. Then her route comes along, and she's just teru teru anime girl numero 50. She just becomes a typical moe bae, and while I get this is a moe gay, why don't you moe go away with that shit? It's all fun and well to tease the protagonist for being bad with women, but to become a timid puppy at the sign of any affection is the definition of being able to dish it without taking it, and it disappointed me immensely. Hisao Nakai is yet another average everyday high schooler who one day gets an unexpected love letter. Finding out the sender is the girl he likes on arrival, he awaits with anticipation for her confession. Anticipating. He anticipated too much and had a heart attack. Learning he has a heart condition, he must transfer to Yamaku High School, a high school for people with disabilities, as he adapts to a new lifestyle. Reluctant at first, he ends up making many friends, one of which being Rin. Rin's an interesting girl. She's eccentric, whimsical, and certainly a tomboy. She's also confusing as fuck. When conversing with people, she very often uses philosophical and abstract language, and therefore is usually misunderstood by her classmates. First of all, her route is difficult to get into. I remember being frustrated with that, since I wasn't using a guide at the time. Secondly, there are times when none of the choices really felt right, whereas in other Katawa Shoujo routes there are very clearly wrong choices, and if it's not clear, it is made clear why later. The route is essentially a puzzle in which you have to understand the character Rin, who purposely attempts to be a confusing character. I like the themes of the route, and at points it is well written, it just feels different from the rest of Katawa Shoujo, which, while I respect, was disappointing in a way. Though I will say, I have warmed up to it after my last reread. When I first did my review of Magical Marriage Lunatics, I called it painfully mediocre. Since then, I decided to reread parts of the game and some of the routes I didn't previously, such as Yorehime's route, featuring a goddess in love with protagonist Yuta, and you know, I was mused. As the embodiment of kindness and lover of romance stories, she can seem like quite the maiden until Yuta does something that brings out her not-so-calm, frightful, angry side. However, seeing Yuta was not Yorehime's only goal in coming to Earth. She wanted to reaffirm the importance of faith and gods to humanity, and that's the crux of the entire route. Not only is this route conflict weak, compared to Magical Marriage Lunatics' assortment of perhaps mediocre routes, but with interesting core concepts, it falls flat in an already deflated game. No matter how many times I return to this visual novel, I just get more disappointed. And while that can be attributed to the visual novel as a whole and not the individual route, Yorehime was one of the characters whose story I was still interested in, but this goddess has forsaken me. The 100-line Last Defense Academy has 100 endings and 21 routes, so surely some of them have to be bad, right? The answer is yes, absolutely. The game was simply too ambitious to have consistency in all its content, but one route specifically was particularly egregious: the Serial Battles route. The main idea of this route is that due to an incident in the plot, the wall of fire that surrounds the Last Defense Academy is considerably weakened, encouraging the enemies to relentlessly attack. This leads to protagonist Takumi and the rest of the cast getting seriously fatigued, almost to the point of insanity. And the developers, bless their hearts, thought it was a good idea to have this fatigue felt by the players as well, through the constant flurry of battles. Now you might be like, but Bruce, it's not that bad. I mean, sure, it's mediocre, but you can skip the battles. Oh, you sweet summer child. When the game first launched, you could not skip battles in the Serial Battles route. So you had to do the grueling experience of the same battles, over and over and over, for a route with very little content overall. This route was an example of artistic vision getting in the way of player enjoyment. Just because you want us, the players, to sympathize with the main cast's fatigue does not mean it makes an experience we want to play. There's a very similar example of this that happened in anime over 15 years ago, the Endless 8 arc in the Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya, and that pretty much killed all the momentum the series had at the time. The moral of the story is, don't beat people over the head with your interesting ideas if you present them in a boring and repetitive way, and respect people's time. A month after launch, they released a patch that let players skip the battles, and whilst it kills the entire point of the route, the game is better for it. Raging Loop is a visual novel that features the classic game of deception known to many as Mafia or Werewolf, and is highly acclaimed for its engaging story and intriguing mystery. Yet, its true end sort of falls flat on its face, which is pretty much the worst case scenario. Having a mediocre true end is akin to having an unsatisfying conclusion. The problem with Raging Loop's true end is that it tries to wrap the story up in a nice little bow without respecting what made the build-up to it great in the first place. It mainly consists of 3 pivotal scenes, one resolution scene for the cast of characters you got to know up to that point, and 2 confrontations. The confrontations feel anticlimactic, and the second one might actually be one of the dumbest scenes I've seen in a visual novel. The how solution of the overall mystery is also quite questionable at best. So with the last 30 or so % of Raging Loop being bad, does it take away from the entire experience? Not really. Raging Loop is a ride that you experience in the moment with multiple clever mafia scenarios that keep the reader on the edge of their toes. To be honest, I can't think of a way to conclude Raging Loop in a better way given the direction of the plot, but this wasn't it. Once upon a time, a young man by the name of Keisuke Takato wakes up and finds himself locked in a white room with 6 other women, all of whom he knows from school. Proceeding to realize they are trapped, they learn they must play a game for the fate of their survival. I'll spare you the gruesome, sexy details, but the beginning of the game is essentially Saw crossed with hentai. And at the end of it all are two routes I have a problem with. Rika's, who is Keisuke's Kohai, and Natsuki's, who is Keisuke's English teacher. This isn't going to be an in-depth look on how these routes are bad. They just don't have much reason to exist. They add very little to the overall story narratively, and are clearly just extra content for fans of the characters. And if a fan of Rika exists, I don't want to be their friend, because I've said it over 3 years ago, and I'll say it again. She is an absolutely insufferable character. I was hoping her route would change my mind, but it did not. And Natsuki is just forgettable. Both of these characters have good moments outside of their routes, but are very clearly the side characters to this story, and while in the context of the plot this makes sense, it doesn't mean the route should be written off. The same can be said about Byakuya, but her route is, like, fun, so it gets a pass from me. In conclusion, these are routes to be routes to fill a quota. There are probably people who appreciate they exist, but Euphoria would change very little if they did not. In Hatsumira, Mimori Ichiro was a petty officer during the Pacific War who, when faced with an enemy warship, began to launch a kamikaze attack. But wouldn't you know it, rather than dying against the poop deck of a warship, he crash lands into a desert, unknowingly isekai'd into a different world. This is a world at war between humans and many non-humanoid races. And stuck between it all, Ichiro gets acquainted with many allies along the way, the first of which he meets is the Dragon Princess Yukikaze. To cut a long story short, the routes in Hatsumira are divided between which non-humanoid tribe you decide to help when the climax of the war approaches, and it's very clear that helping the Dragon tribe that Yukikaze commands is the main route of the game, considering it has you face off against the main villain. The problem isn't that the route is bad, the problem is that the route is good, and that's it. Romance overall is not Hatsumira's strong suit, so its story and the build-up to the climax are the main factors here. And it ironically works better in every other route, because you'll feel more emotionally connected to the other tribes and their respective heroines. Yukikaze's route isn't bad and concludes the narrative, but it felt weak not only compared to the other routes, but also because for the amount of build-up we get through the novel, it's not as satisfying as it could be, though there's an argument to be made that Hatsumira's routes in general leave something to be desired. That was every disappointing route I could think of while making this video, but I'd love to hear what you have to say on the topic in the comments below. And as always, I'll see you next time.